And welcome to another live Thursday video. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm trying out another outdoor location, so we'll see how this goes. Today I want to talk to you about something I mentioned on this week's podcast, the episode of Coming Back. It's an old YouTube video that I actually produced called Stop Telling Your Kids Not to Fall in Love, and it was this really kind of angry, ragey, catch your eye headline because really angry at parents, but I have a whole backstory to tell you about that that's going to be really interesting. But what I want from you before we start is, if you've ever not done something you loved, or taken up a dream, or entered into a relationship, or brought a pet or a child or something into your life that would bring a lot of love to your life because you wanted to spare yourself some grief and some heartbreak, comment below and tell us exactly what that story is for you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Also, this week on the podcast, I want to tell you about something that's coming up for me. We're reaching our 10th episode of the podcast, which is going to be a fun one, where we don't get so heavy into grief itself, but talk about something that's funny or whimsical or from pop culture. And so the next one that's going to be coming up, the very first one, the 10th episode, is July 19th, which is 2 Wednesdays from now. And we're going to be doing an entire episode on grief and the Golden Girls. So if you could, I would absolutely love if you called into the show or emailed me at shelby@shelbyforcynthia.com with your questions or your thoughts or your comments on grief and the Golden Girls. I think that would be so much fun. I'm realizing now that I've got a microphone on and haven't plugged it in yet. I hope you guys can hear me. It's really fast. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I hope you can hear me a little bit better now that this is next to my mouth. Okay, it's been an interesting day. Alrighty, so the basis of this story came actually from last September, October, when I was working with one of my very first clients through the grief recovery method. And it's a 7 to 8 week program that walks you through recovering all these thoughts that are circling around in your brain about the things, the people, the places that you lost, putting them down on paper, kind of organizing them together, and then releasing them through a very specific action plan. And so in the first couple of weeks of this program, there's an exercise that asks you to list all of the myths that you heard about grief as a kid growing up. So I covered a lot of these in episode 5 of the podcast, which is called The 6 Grief Myths and Why They Suck. And but there's also a lot of room to talk about different grief myths that aren't necessarily included in the top 6. So I had a client who came to me and she wrote on her list that her mom had told her and her brothers growing up that they were not allowed to get a dog because when the dog died, they would be sad. Like, this is verbatim from her mother's mouth. You're not allowed to get a dog because what if the dog dies? You're going to be sad. And that really struck me when she brought that to me, because there's like 10,000 good reasons not to get a dog. Dogs are loud, they shed a lot, they make a mess, you have to worry about training them. If you go on vacation, you have to figure out where to board them or who's going to take care of them. You have to pay to have vet fees every year, you have to get special equipment for your car or like a crate for your house, things like that. There's a lot of really good reasons not to get a dog, but to have one of the reasons be you can't have a dog because when the dog dies you'll be sad, that's basically saying you're not allowed to fall in love with this animal. You're not allowed to bring this experience of love and joyfulness into your life because when it's over, you're going to grieve. And it just struck me in this really hard way, and so I made this first video about it, which I think I put up on my YouTube page back in October of last year, and it was really heated. It was really angry because I couldn't believe that this was something that parents are going around telling their kids. And then as I thought more about it, I was like, this applies to a lot of other situations as well. So there are moments when your friends will tell you're thinking about getting a relationship with this guy or this girl or whoever, and you find out that they're moving cities or countries or colleges or whatever in 12 months, in a year. So all your friends will be like, well, don't bother getting into a relationship with them because they're going to be moving in a year, and that's going to be a really sad and heartbreaking experience. Different characters, same story. And of course there's a similar one also of like fostering kids. Don't bring these kids into your house because they're going to be adopted by somebody else, and when that adoption process happens, you're going to be sad. You're going to be terribly upset and terribly heartbroken. And then there's another story of, don't take that class, don't go to grad school, don't follow this career path or this hobby that you have a spark or an interest in, because when you end up not using it in the future to make money for yourself, it's going to wreck you, or you won't be able to afford it, or how do you think that's going to play out in your life? There's all these attempts that other people make, and even that we make, that we rationalize in our hearts to try and prevent us from experiencing heartbreak. And it seems like if we don't engage in these things that we love, then we can prevent ourselves from feeling heartbreak. But that's not real. That's not real at all. You can't say, oh, I'm not going to engage in love and I'll just never experience grief. No, grief is going to happen regardless. So it's just so baffling to me when that came to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I've told myself this story too. And I don't want to slam on parents, on teachers, on professionals, on bosses, on coworkers, any of these people who have our best interests at heart, because deep down what they're trying to do is prevent us from feeling pain. People hate to see other people in pain, especially other people that they love. And through their lives, they've been taught, or they've taught themselves, not to fall in love, because they have experienced a pain or a grief so great that they're like, I'm never going to fall in love again. I'm never going to do that to myself again, because that was so bad. I'm not going to let myself live in that world again. Tanya says, not with relationships, but I keep my creative projects to myself. I guess that is rooted in fear of what others would think of my work. Don't put yourself out there. Yes, I totally hear and agree with that. There is a fear of being seen, because to be seen, there is a type of love in that, is will people love my work? It's a vulnerability thing. Love is an experience of vulnerability, and to make ourselves vulnerable to these people, to these places, to these creative projects, to these pets, to these dreams, to these homes, to these jobs, is to say, I am willing to be broken by this, and that is absolutely freaking scary. And I never want to rap on these people who are teaching us this, because it's not their fault. It's not anybody's fault. There's just this heart hardening that happens, and we haven't learned as a society how to come beyond that yet. We haven't learned how to let things break us and then continue to love beyond. And so we keep hearing these things like, you're not going to get a dog because when the dog dies you're going to be sad, or you're not going to go to grad school because you're not going to be able to afford it and that would just break your heart, or you're not going to be in a relationship with this guy because he's going to move to Timbuktu in 12 months and you're not going with him. They're just trying to teach us incorrect information, which is that to love is to break. And so relationships with jobs, with people, with places, with things, with homes, with creative projects aren't worth it. People try and prevent us from feeling this pain. But the key here, and the turnaround here, and kind of where I want to get into some tools for being broken and continuing to love again, is to sit with our kids and our friends and our co-workers and our families through these losses. That's when the real healing happens, is when we actually allow them to experience these losses and then to sit with them through it. And what that looks like is something I mentioned also in the third episode of the podcast, which is called The Art of Comforting, and it's all these tips for helping people through grief processes as they experience it. And it's just listening to their heartbreak. It's allowing them to be broken in front of us. It's allowing them to feel pain and let us sit there and experience it, and not telling them, well, I told you so, or not telling them, you asked for this, or even you paid for this, as it applies to them. And it's really important, because we need to teach people that it's okay to have these moments where we're broken. It's okay to have these moments where we need to grieve the things that we're losing. And in order to continue having these loving, wonderful relationships with people, we have to honor what they were to us. People think that if we don't get the dog never dies, and so we never have to have that whole experience of grief and loss. But what happens when your grandfather dies? What happens when your mom dies? What happens when you lose a job that you really, really loved? You grieve. Like, it's an inevitable experience. We can't keep teaching people that if you don't engage with it at all, it's never going to happen to you, because that's just not how it works. That's not how life works for us. And so what we really need to do in this whole process is to stop telling people that by avoiding love, or by avoiding relationships, or avoiding jobs, or avoiding creative projects, that we'll never suffer. Because that is such a grief myth, and it drives me crazy, because people are like, if I just do this, I won't feel that. But it's not true, because you will feel that, whatever grief is for you at some point in your life. It's just impossible to escape it. I wrote this down before I started the podcast, or the episode today, which is why I'm glancing down. And it's in all capital letters, and it says, as if we can prevent our hearts from falling in love. As if we can prevent our hearts from falling in love. There is absolutely no way we can prevent ourselves from forming attachments in this world. There's absolutely no way that we can prevent ourselves from loving. So conversely, there's absolutely no way we can prevent ourselves from grieving. And even if we suppress it and tamp it down and not let any of these emotions out, part of us, our bodies, our minds, our spirits are still grieving for connections that we made. Debbie says, sometimes I feel like I want a new situation / love to be perfect before I move forward. That isn't going to happen. Correct. And there is an element of perfection in here. That's a really good catch, and something I haven't actually spoken about yet. So thank you, Debbie, for contributing that down there. I love all these comments today. I love talking to you guys. Yes, I imagine what you mean by perfect is by having a lot of criteria met. And I've had this for myself before too. I've actually found myself making lists for a perfect partner, which is helpful in some situations because there are criteria: no drugs, lives in the same city, like all these other things that you want for people that you're dating. But then there's also things that get to be a little too specific in relationships, or they have to, we have to be making this amount of money, or we have to live in this neighborhood, or we have to have met both of our parents, or things like that before we can move forward in a relationship. And of course I'm talking about romantic relationships, but you could be talking about friend relationships as well. But yeah, there is an element of perfection, as in, if this love is not going to be perfect, I don't want it to happen at all. And that's just not a reality for us. And that's also something that's taught to us by our parents and our peers and society and our teachers and our bosses and what have you, that if it's not perfect, I don't want to see it. And that's a whole other thing related to grief too, is not being allowed to make mistakes, not being allowed to screw up, and not being allowed to be broken by the choices that we make and then recorrect. So good catch. I absolutely love that. I'm going to come back to really quickly the idea of as if we can prevent ourselves from falling in love before I go for the day, but I've so loved talking with all of you here. There's just this idea that permeates society that if we can prevent ourselves from falling in love, we can also prevent ourselves from feeling pain, and it's just not true. And I guess that's the big message that I'm here to tell you guys today, is that this avoidance that's happening for feeling pain, the idea that we can prevent grief or protect our hearts from grief or pain, or protect other people, like our kids especially, from grief, loss, pain, the harsh truths of the world, it's not going to happen. And the best way to experience those pains, because they are coming, they're coming down the pike, they're coming for you at some point, the best way to experience those things is together. And we're so panicked as a society about experiencing grief and pain that we tell people if you don't engage, it won't happen. And then when it does happen, for whatever reason, maybe you don't get the dog, so the dog doesn't die, so you never have that experience, but the grandfather dies, or the mom dies, or the sister dies, or whoever, or a neighbor that you love moves away, your kids are going to grieve. They're gonna grieve. So you can't not prevent this from happening. And then what happens is when grief does occur, there's this whole idea of, don't cry, don't feel bad. If you're going to cry, go to your room. That's where the other 6 grief myths come in. Just keep busy and it'll go away. There's all these people like to think that grief doesn't exist, and it's just, that's not real. It cracks me up sometimes how crazy it is. And that's where all those grief myths come in. But if we acknowledge that grief is going to exist as a reality in our lives, we'll stop trying to protect ourselves from it and just know that it's coming. And when we see that it's coming, and when we know that it's going to be in our space eventually, there's less fear when we can anticipate it coming. And even if there is fear, there's solidarity in knowing that grief is going to happen in our lives, but we can experience it, we can hold hands, we can cry, we can create a memorial, we can color some pictures of the dog together. We can make this a joint experience, so we honor grief as a normal and natural human experience. It's like having growth spurts. It's like when your shins hurt and you start growing, or like your baby teeth fall out and you get adult teeth. Like, grieving is a rite of passage, and we're treating it like maybe if we take all of these steps it won't ever happen to us, and then we're really surprised when it happens, and then we treat it like crap. We don't honor grief as this experience of remembering and memorializing and honoring all the things that we've ever loved, because that's what grief is. Grief is all of this love that we have been able to give other people, and in addition, all the hopes, dreams, and expectations that were created out of that love. And sometimes we don't ever get to experience all the things that we want to with people, but that is grief in and of itself. And when the dog dies, when you don't get the job because you went to grad school, when the guy moves to Timbuktu and your relationship ends, we need to be able to grieve. We need to be able to have that rite of passage. So that is the message that I have for all of you today. Thank you so much, so much, so much. I'm so happy for all of you guys who commented with stories, experiences from their lives. I have loved seeing them talk to each other down there. It's a really great place to connect and meet. If you're not already a member, there's a link in my in the description for this little Thursday live video of my private Facebook group called the Grief Growers Garden. I would absolutely love if you were a member. It's a great place if you're having a crap day, or you want to talk about how you need things to be perfect before you move forward, or you want to talk about how you're afraid to put your creative work out in the world because it is a vulnerability experience. It's a great place to just have crap days and share art with each other and like lift each other up on days when it's hard. It's a community that's committed to growing through grief. So I would absolutely love to see you there. It's all free. It's definitely private. So if there's things you can't tell your friends or family, or don't want to tell your friends or family, it's a really great place to put all of that. That's still online, still on Facebook, so it's accessible to you all the time. And then I would encourage you, if you haven't already, or if you're not already, to subscribe and listen to my podcast, Coming Back, Conversations on Life After Loss. This week I actually did talk about what we're talking about now, which is, trying to prevent ourselves from feeling grief by using phrases, by telling our kids they can do certain things. And kind of that first video that I created when I came upon this idea for the first time. And also there's an interview on there with my all-time favorite, very first coming back mentor in my own life. Her name is Stephanie Zamora, and she is a life coach, she's an author, she's a business strategist. She's just like this fantastic lady, and she and I experienced our losses within 2 years of each other. And so we're just walking this parallel path about loss together and learning these lessons simultaneously. So it's a very cool, like, groovy interview between the two of us. So I would absolutely love if you tuned in. Alrighty, so I'm going to call it a day. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Tanya, for commenting, and I will see you guys later. Bye!